My name is Roberto. I am 44 years old and I come from Ayacucho, a city in the highlands of Peru where the air is thin and cold and the mountains surround everything like walls built by something older than memory. I am a husband and a father. Those are the two most important things I have ever been, and the two things that brought me here to this country, to this life that is still being built brick by careful brick. I want to tell you about my family first, because this is not only my story. It never was. My wife is Carmen. We met when we were 17, in the same school, in the same classroom, sitting 2 rows apart. She was the kind of girl who raised her hand before the teacher finished the question. Sharp and quiet and certain in a way that I found immediately terrifying and immediately attractive. We have been together since we were 19. I have spent more of my life with her than without her, and I cannot imagine the arithmetic working any other way. We have 2 children, Mateo, who is now 15, and Lucia, who is 11. Mateo was born serious, an old soul from the beginning, the kind of child who observes before he speaks and means everything he says. Lucia was born laughing and has not stopped since. Between the 4 of us, we make something complete, something I spent years believing was unbreakable. I was a secondary school teacher in Ayacucho, history and geography. 22 years in the same school, the same corridors, the same courtyard where I had myself once been a student. I knew every crack in those walls. I knew which classroom flooded when it rained hard, and which window didn't close properly and let the wind in during winter. That school was part of my body in a way that is difficult to explain unless you have spent most of your life inside one place. Carmen worked as a nurse at the regional hospital. Long shifts, impossible conditions, equipment that was always insufficient, salaries that were always delayed. She came home exhausted in a way that went beyond the body. But she never complained about the work itself. She loved the work. She was built for it, the same way some people are built for music or for the sea. We were not rich. We were never rich. But we had a house, a real house, that we had built room by room over 15 years. Adding a bedroom when Mateo came, and another when Lucia came, and a small porch where Carmen kept plants, and where we sat in the evenings when the day allowed it. We had a life with shape and texture and roots. We had enough. And then, slowly, we didn't. Peru's crisis didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like a leak. Small at first, manageable. You put a bucket under it and carry on. Then the leak becomes 2 leaks. Then the ceiling starts to come down. My salary at the school stopped being paid on time. First 1 month late, then 2, then 3 months of waiting for money that had already been spent on food and medicine and school supplies for my own children. I took on private tutoring in the evenings, traveling across the city after a full day of teaching, arriving home at 9 or 10 at night with Carmen already asleep from her shift. We were 2 people living in the same house and sharing the same bed, but increasingly passing each other in the dark. The violence in Ayacucho grew worse during those years. Not the organized political violence of earlier decades, which had left its own deep wounds in that region, but something newer and different, the violence of narco-trafficking, expanding its territory, of criminal organizations recruiting young men from poor neighborhoods with the logic of hunger and desperation, boys from my own classes. I watched it happen and felt powerless in the specific way that teachers feel powerless when the world outside the classroom is stronger than anything they can offer inside it. One of my students, a boy named Eric, 16 years old, bright and funny, and the best football player in the school, was killed one October afternoon, 3 blocks from his house. Wrong place, wrong moment, wrong country, I thought when I heard. I went to his funeral and stood at the back because I couldn't trust my face to stay composed, and I didn't want his mother to see her son's teacher falling apart. I drove home from that funeral and sat in the car outside our house for 40 minutes without going in. Carmen came out eventually and knocked on the window. I rolled it down. She looked at me for a moment and then said very quietly, "How much longer are we going to wait, Roberto?" I didn't answer that night. But the question had already taken root. The decision to leave took 6 months to become real. 6 months of conversations at the kitchen table after the children were asleep. Voices low, maps on Carmen's phone, numbers that never quite added up, fear sitting between us like a third person at the table. We researched Chile first, then considered Spain, then came back to Chile because the language was the same and the border was reachable, and we had a distant contact, Carmen's cousin Rodrigo, who had been in Santiago for 3 years and said there was work. We told the children on a Sunday in March. I had rehearsed what I was going to say approximately 40 times, and when the moment came, I forgot all of it. I just looked at them across the breakfast table and said, "We are going to move to another country. We are going to Chile, and we are going to be okay." Mateo looked at me for a long moment and then asked, "When?" Lucia asked, "Can I bring my books?" I said yes to both questions, even though I only had a real answer to one of them. Carmen squeezed my hand under the table. Leaving the house was the hardest part of the preparation. We couldn't sell it quickly enough to take the money with us, so we left it in the care of a neighbor with a verbal agreement that still makes me anxious when I think about it too carefully. I packed my books last, the ones I had accumulated over 22 years of teaching, and then I stood in front of them and understood that I couldn't take them. The weight, the space. I took 3. Just 3. Choosing them the way you choose which parts of yourself to carry when you can't carry all of yourself. My mother lives in Ayacucho. She is 68 and has a bad hip and would not be coming with us. I am her only child. I want to say that slowly so it lands properly. I am her only child, and I was leaving her in a city that was becoming more dangerous, with a hip that made her slow, with neighbors who were kind but were not her son. The morning we left, she made us breakfast before dawn. Chicharron and bread and tea with too much sugar, the way she always makes it. She fed the children as if she was trying to put enough food in them to last for years. When it was time to go, she hugged Carmen first. A long hug, the kind between two women who respect each other deeply. Then she hugged Mateo and Lucia together, one arm around each of them, her eyes closed. Then she hugged me. I am a grown man. I am 44 years old. I have buried students and stood at gravesides without crying. I held myself together that morning until the exact moment she said into my shoulder, in a voice so small I almost didn't hear it, "Come back when you can." Not if, when. I didn't deserve that faith, but I held on to it for every hard kilometer that followed. The crossing from Peru into Chile via the Colchane border point is something that other migrants had warned us about and that we had told ourselves we were prepared for. You are never prepared for it. The Atacama Desert at that border is one of the most hostile places I have ever stood. Flat and infinite and indifferent in a way that makes you feel very small and very mortal. We crossed partly on foot, partly in a vehicle with 12 other people, at night, because the days were too hot and the nights were merely brutal rather than lethal. Lucia held her small backpack of books against her chest the entire way. She didn't complain once. Not once. 11 years old, crossing a desert at night, and she didn't complain once. I look at her now sometimes, and I see that night in her without her knowing it, a kind of knowledge in her eyes that wasn't there before. I am proud of it, and I mourn it at the same time. Mateo walks next to me the whole way. At some point in the darkest part of the night, without saying anything, he reached over and took my hand. My 15-year-old son, who at home had reached the age of not wanting to be seen holding his father's hand, took my hand in the dark desert and held it until we reached the other side. I have not told him what that meant to me. I should tell him. Carmen moved through that crossing the way she moves through everything difficult, with a focused calm that I have spent 25 years trying to understand and have decided is simply who she is. She checked on everyone around her. She gave water to an elderly woman who was struggling near the back. She is a nurse in a desert, the same as she is a nurse in a hospital. The profession doesn't stop at the door. Santiago received us with paperwork and uncertainty. Rodrigo helped us find a room, one room, the four of us, in a shared house in the Estacion Central neighborhood. One room with 2 mattresses on the floor and a window that looked onto a grey wall. We lived there for 7 months. I will be honest about those months, because honesty is the whole point of telling this story. They were humiliating in ways I had not anticipated. I was a teacher for 22 years. I had a classroom and students who called me Professor Roberto, and a subject I knew deeply, and a professional identity that was part of how I understood myself as a man, as a person, as someone with something to offer the world. In Santiago, I was nobody, worse than nobody. I was a foreigner with an accent and a foreign qualification that nobody recognized and no local work history. I applied for jobs I was overqualified for and didn't get them. I applied for jobs that required no qualification and felt the particular shame of a middle-aged man with a university degree being told he wasn't what they were looking for. Carmen found work first, as she almost always finds things first because she is more practical than me and less attached to her pride. She began working as a caregiver for an elderly man in the Las Condes neighborhood, long hours, physically demanding, nothing like the clinical nursing she had trained for, but honest and needed and paid on time. She came home tired every night and never once made me feel that her finding work before me was a point against me. I made myself feel that without any help from her. I found work eventually. A private tutoring agency that placed me with families whose children needed help with history and Spanish. 1 student became 3, 3 became 6. 6 months after arriving in Santiago, I was teaching again in living rooms instead of classrooms, but teaching when the first parent told me their child had improved significantly and shook my hand at the door with genuine gratitude. I walked to the bus stop and sat down on the bench and allowed myself one long breath. Just one. There was still so much to do. Today, we have a 2-bedroom apartment. Small but ours, or ours in the way that rented things are yours. Mateo is in school and has found his people, a group of friends who are a mix of Chilean and Venezuelan and Colombian and Peruvian. A generation of children who are growing up knowing that belonging is not about where you were born. Lucia reads everything she can find and has informed us she wants to be a writer. Carmen works at a clinic now, a real clinic, using her real skills. I am in the process of having my teaching qualifications validated so that one day I can return to a real classroom. My mother calls every Sunday. Her hip is better since the operation, which Carmen researched and pushed for and organized from 2,000 kilometers away, because that is simply what Carmen does. Last month, my mother told me that the new teacher at my old school is young and enthusiastic, and the students like him. She told me this with kindness, not cruelty. She knows me well enough to know I needed to hear it with kindness. I have thought many times about what I lost in this move and what I gained, and whether those things can be weighed against each other. I lost my classroom. I lost my house, still sitting empty in Ayacucho with a neighbor keeping watch. I lost daily proximity to my mother. I lost the mountains I grew up inside of, the thin, cold air, the lightning storms over the valley, the market on Sundays where I knew every vendor by name. I gained my children in a city where Eric's story is less likely to be their story. I gained Carmen still doing the work she was made to do. I gained Mateo's hand in the dark, in the desert, and Lucia carrying her books across a border like they were the most important things in the world, which for her they were, which meant she was right. It is not a simple calculation. It was never going to be a simple calculation. But when I sit on the small balcony of our apartment on a Sunday evening, and I hear Lucia reading aloud to herself in her room, and I hear Carmen and Mateo arguing cheerfully about football in the kitchen, I think about my grandmother's porch back home where I used to sit as a child and feel safe, and I think that safety is not a place. Safety is the people inside the wall. I brought mine with me. My name is Roberto. I was a teacher in Peru, and I will be a teacher again. In the meantime, my children are learning. That is enough.